In the wake of the Hamas invasion of Israel, one school district directed teachers to a resource that claimed Israeli terrorism has been significantly worse than that of the Palestinians. Joining us this morning to discuss is Erika, Director of Outreach for Parents Defending Education. And Erika, the superintendent of Revere Public Schools in Massachusetts, sent out a district-wide email to staff encouraging them to talk with students and pointing them towards resources that essentially blame Israel for the war they're now fighting. Tell us more about this message and how teachers in the district responded.
So we first heard from this from staff members, although since then, because families have been so appalled, we've also heard from families. But essentially, an email was drafted, immediately as a reaction to what was happening after the brutal massacre in Israel. And as in so many cases, these school districts and colleges, for that matter, feel the need to weigh in on these events, but they outsource who puts together the materials that they send. If I had to guess, I would say that the superintendent in Revere had no idea that she was sending out materials that didn't just have such an anti-Israel bias. But let's keep in mind, they essentially were laying the blame at the feet of the same people who had just been massacred in numbers not seen since the Holocaust, the loss in that one single day. And I hate to say, but this is not surprising to my organization, because we see this sort of rhetoric and language and these kinds of materials. Keep in mind, the source that she sent out comes from an organization called Learning for Justice. They used to be called Teaching Tolerance. And yet what we see, of course, is the exact opposite. And we're not surprised at all by the backlash.
Going back, you mentioned rhetoric. We've seen similar, of course, sentiments expressed on college campuses all throughout the country. What do you think is fueling this growing rhetoric in support of Palestine after the deadly Hamas invasion?
I really don't think that people have been either willing or able to believe what organizations like mine and others have been saying when it comes to the absolute fixation in schools on identity. Kids have been bathing in messages about oppressor versus oppressed, about all of the reasons why certain identities, certain group identities, largely around race and ethnicity, but not only that. And so what they see right now, they're at the level almost where, because their groups are being listed in this sort of hierarchical, on this sort of oppression matrix, if you will, the language around this is dehumanizing. And what I think a lot of people have been missing with this is that, yes, there's been a ton of anti-whiteness messaging in K-12 and on college campuses, but that has always included Jews. And then on top of that, sort of the anti-Israel, anti-Zionist messaging, again, in schools, has been impossible to overstate. And what we're seeing now is sort of the inevitable result of having students marinate in this rhetoric and in this content for so many years with no pushback.
One more question for you, Erika, before we let you go. From a parent's point of view, how do you think schools should manage children with behavioral issues without dismissing their education or jeopardizing the students around them?
So I guess this is, if I had to guess, this is about California deciding that they're not going to suspend students anymore for willful defiance. Every single poll, every single survey from forever until now tells us that the #1 priority for parents is safety. They want their children to be safe. Clearly, that's on full display right now in the wake of the horrific events over the weekend. And so the fact that schools are moving away from maintaining a safe environment for all students so that they can accommodate the smaller percentage of students that are disrupting and creating an unsafe environment, it's obviously hard to justify. And so while it makes sense to want to help these students manage their behaviors and work towards, not being constantly defiant in the classroom and in the hallways, that cannot take precedence over the needs of the rest of the school community, both students and staff.
Director of Outreach for Parents Defending Education, Erika Sanzi, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Have a great weekend.
You as well. Thanks for having me.